Hi, I'm going to go over just a couple of transcription issues that we've had recently on the last homework and make sure that it's understandable what's going on and any changes that need to be made with those. So again, I'm going to address some common mistakes, talk about just a few things that are sometimes in the gray area, just to let you know that those are going to be a little less clear and you may have differences between you and classmates. Walk through some analyses that we're going to do, and then also talk about the homework for next week. So some of the issues that we've seen is that there's some confusion about present progressive ing versus gerunds. So the first thing that you need to remember is that present progressive ing is going to require a main verb, and that's the conjugated form of to be. So it's always going to be paired with is, am, are, was, and were. Whereas gerunds are functioning as nouns, they're not going to be preceded by these auxiliary verbs. So that's an important distinction, and we're going to look at a SALT transcript in a minute to show you the difference. In contrast, we've also got the past perfect tense versus regular past tense ed that is going to need to be associated because you only slash regular past tense ed. Past perfect tense is going to be things like he was supposed to come home. That's supposed, the ed does not get slashed as supposed to if you said he jumped across the river. The jumped is going to be slashed because it's regular past tense ed. So I am going to post some websites that should give you some additional information, but I would also strongly encourage you to go back to your syntax book that you had for language science and language development and review the verb sections for past perfect tense and present progressive ing. And then there should be some information about gerunds in the noun chapter, I believe. With mazing, you're going to want to keep all of your mazes together into a single maze when you have multiple words and phrases right beside each other, and I'll show you an example of that. Lastly, coding is something, and transcribing, that is just a very meticulous task. So you need to be very careful, and you need to utilize your tools in SALT to check for errors. So if you go back to the first homework that you had where you could check to make sure you didn't have any root words missing that hadn't been slashed, that's an important feature that you might want to utilize more often before you turn in your homework, because I think a couple of you have errors that really were just missed items and not that you don't understand the concept. Lastly, I want to remind everybody that if it's been covered in a tutorial, the concept, anything, you're going to be held accountable for it in the homework. So even if it's not listed on the rubric, if it's a blatant error, for instance, leaving off ending punctuation, then it's going to be counted wrong. So you need to keep that in mind, because the idea is that you're putting all of these pieces together so that here pretty soon we're going to analyze multiple samples and then compare and contrast them. What I want to do is go back and look at the assignment that you turned in most recently and talk about just some common things that I saw. First, I want to point out that on these learned phrases, much like proper nouns like names like Dr. Johnson or Sleeping Beauty, you're going to underscore or put them all together so that they get counted as a single word. This is to keep you from inflating some of those numbers that we're going to analyze and obtain today. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is, again, these gerunds. So you'll notice here when we look at the word running, it's preceded by started. So the boys started running. Because we don't have is, am, are, was, or were here, it's going to be your first clue that this might actually be a noun and not a verb, because we only slash the present progressive verb. And so in that case, you want to make sure that you check for that is, am, are, was, or were. For instance, when we get over here on this part of the sample, in this instance, you look at taking, and you can see that immediately before it we have a were, which is the past tense of the to be verb when it's in the plural form. So it's really important that you look for that, because that's going to be your clue that you want to actually slash this ing right here. The other thing I want you to note right here on this taking, and then there was another one of these up above, which was, now I can't find it, but you'll notice that the root word is actually spelled the way that it would normally be spelled even if it didn't have the ing. So even though when you write a paper for me, it is an insult, and you would spell it T-A-K-I-N-G, in this particular case, before the slash, we're going to spell the root word the way it really should occur without that. The same thing with tripped. In this case, even though we would conventionally, for orthographic purposes, add an extra P in there so that we don't inflate our number of different words, we're going to spell it with one P preceding the slash. So it's really important to do that. Another example, I found it, is closing. In this case, we go ahead and leave the E, because otherwise it would count the CLOS as a different word from CLOSE. And again, we're now to the part of the semester where we're actually going to start analyzing our samples, so it's important to go ahead and do these accurately so that our data comes out correct. Okay, the other example I wanted to show you was down here in this sentence. You don't want to segment the now separately from frog was really lonely when you're mazing. Keep it all together as a single maze. Same thing here, even though we have multiple different false starts, just go ahead and keep it all together. So that's not going to count as wrong. Now you'll notice this sentence here is a prime example of something that would be considered a gray area. So the child said the frog was sad, lonely. So there's two ways that we could figure he meant to do this. He could have meant that the frog was sad and lonely, in which case you might asterisk in the and the way we do for omitted words. Or you could think that maybe he wanted to be more specific and he rephrased his sentence and added the word lonely, and so therefore sad was a false start and it would need to be mazed. There isn't necessarily a right or wrong on that, so those are small differences that you will sometimes see. Again, woods is another example of a little bit of a gray area. You know, those plurals that don't really happen by themselves as singulars, like pants. You don't say, I'm going to go get my pant and just put one leg on. A lot of people would say that woods is a plural word that really never goes into a singular form, and so therefore you wouldn't slash it. Again, those are things that can have a little more flexibility and you're not going to get counted off for. Quotes are another thing that a lot of times can be a little bit confusing. You're not going to get counted off for them, but it is important to understand that there may be times when you think this should be a separate T unit from the line before because there's a distinct pause, whereas in this one, the boy said to his dog, go on the other side of the branch, that's all going to be a single T unit, or somebody else might actually segment it. That's why in a lot of research you're going to see things at 90% reliable and not 100%, because there are these little differences, and it's not necessarily that somebody's right or wrong with some of these gray issues. Okay, so finishing up for today, I just wanted to end with kind of explaining what's going to happen with your homework. Again, a reminder, I need you to continue utilizing all the SALT conventions that you've covered thus far. And then I'm going to ask you to analyze your sample once you've transcribed it and segmented it correctly and done all the punctuation and the slashing of bound morphemes, underscoring of any proper nouns, any of that. You're going to then analyze the sample. I would strongly encourage you to not only check your sample for errors as far as ending punctuation, but I would also strongly encourage you to check for those root words and make sure that you know why you may or may not have marked a bound morpheme, so that when you analyze, your data is as accurate as possible. The other thing that you will be doing is then taking your analyses and you'll be answering some questions. Now, this is where there may be slight differences in the numbers and averages that you get between your partners. And this is to be expected. I will actually be more concerned if things are exactly the same, because it would be very rare that two people would transcribe a sample exactly the same way. So what you might hear as a false start, they might have thought was an as in a. Another person might hear something as a quote and another person not. What should happen is that the numbers don't change a great deal. It's when our differences start causing large differences in numbers that we get concerned. So please don't be disconcerted if somebody is slightly off from you on the MLU or the number of different words or total number of words, because that's actually to be expected. And we get more concerned as instructors when we see things exactly the same. If you have questions, please let me know. You can either set up an appointment, or you can definitely call, or you can drop by before or after any of your classes.